in the United States, you know, we got a problem in our area, and well, in the United States, that the police are like scared to do their job, and they're all trigger happy, and that they especially don't know how to deal with people that have mental health issues or neurodivergent issues, you know, on the autism spectrum. And I said that as a mother of an autistic child, you know, I have a fear every day that I'll get a call saying that the police murdered my kid because they didn't know how to interact with him if they did run into him. And I literally got that call 4 days later from my ex-husband saying that the Brooklyn Center police had murdered my son. My son got upset over a messed up fast food order, which is, you know, not surprising, just had a bad day and kind of flew off the handle. Him and his grandfather, you know, had an argument, and he came back home angry and, you know, was upset and trying to get attention. So, you know, was essentially maybe threatening to hurt himself. And the police were called by the grandfather, but my son calmed him down right away, which is pretty normal for, you know, somebody in that, you know, for him or people like him, and everything was fine. So the grandfather called the police back and said, you know, everything's fine. My son is fine, or my grandson is fine. You know, we don't need you to come. Well, they decided to come anyhow. And even though you could see that the situation was under control and there was nothing going on, you know, the grandmother, grandfather, and my grandson were all just sitting in the living room. Everything was fine. And the police come up, you can see them, they're like all tactically sneaking up around, you know, in the neighborhood and around the house. And the grandfather sees them from the, you know, the living room window and walks out and, you know, tells them everything's fine and they don't need to go in. And two of the officers insist on going in, you know, search my son, have him sitting in the middle of the living room on just a chair, a wooden chair. And after 12 minutes of him complying for no reason, you know, keep in mind, he wasn't in the process of doing anything wrong, you know. He got frustrated after 12 minutes, not frustrated, but overwhelmed, and just put his hands down and his head, started crying. And as far as we are concerned, got up to run out. Where he was running would have led him directly out the back door and out of the house. For some reason, the cops did know that house layout and, you know, intercepted, which apparently is not something they're supposed to do because it creates a situation. The article, you know, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, which today, by the way, I am now finding out, and I did always wonder if Brooklyn Center is in Washington County, why did my son's case go to Hennepin County Attorney's Office? So I just, somebody, legal resource corporate coalition or something like that pointed that out today. So I'm all like, you know, so things are coming up that I didn't even realize might have been problematic in my son's case, because on they closed the case, you know, and chose not to charge the officers, as they do in 99.9% of police-involved murders. And so not only do we find out that happens, but then after, and we couldn't get any traction, you know? Like after coming out and protesting all year after George Floyd and all summer and all fall and all winter and now all spring, yeah, maybe Minneapolis knows some of these families finally, you know, other than what I call the household names like a George Floyd or a Breonna Taylor or a, you know, a Tamir Rice. I mean, you know, we know these names. We all know some of these names. But the problem is that's just a small handful of names. And just in Minnesota alone, we have close to 500 murders only in the last 20 years, police murders, state-sanctioned murders. And so now Daunte Wright was murdered on Sunday. Well, all of a sudden, and I've just been going at 100 miles per hour, literally since the moment we found out that he was murdered, because It happened in Brooklyn Center. It's literally like less than 5 blocks away from where my son was murdered. The grandparents and his neighbor, who was his good friend, you know, who were there and heard the shots and everything, can hear all the commotion that's going on in the rallies and all that stuff from their place. It's that close. Well, we end up finding out that Kimberly Potter, and I had seen the body cam with her in there, but I didn't think anything of it. You know, I was focused on the ones who murdered my son, but she was the commanding officer in my son's case. And I woke up on Monday morning to people like Ben Crump, famous civil rights attorney out of Florida, posting about my son and how Brooklyn Center does things wrong, Kim Potter in specific. You know, and then later in the day, I hear Sean King, the news personality, talking about my child and how Kim Potter, and I guess he said this was in the case file. I haven't read the case file. I'll tell you later why I don't read their garbage. But that apparently she instructed the officers to separate, go to their cars, not talk to anybody, which is all appropriate. But then she instructed them to turn off their body cameras, which indicates a possible cover-up, attempt at a cover-up, and is not even close to what their protocol should be. We should be able to hear their reaction. We should be able to hear any calls they made. We should hear if they had actually talked to anybody afterwards. We now have no proof of that. So ever since Monday, I'm getting these constant contacts of, hey, you know, they were just talking about your child in depth on CNN. Hey, you know, here's another article. And so unfortunately, but for the death of Daunte Wright, the people who are now hearing about my son wouldn't have heard about him. It took yet another life. And it had to be in proximity and in the same department for anybody to, because here now people are talking about Kobe's case, but there's still all the other families here because they're not related to that case aren't being heard. At least I am. But us families, we stick together and we want everybody to know that, you know, it's not just George Floyd and it's not just Daunte Wright. Minneapolis, and it's not just the Minneapolis Police Department, which we focus on a lot, and the St. Paul Police Department, it's all of them. You know, Brooklyn Center, Richfield, and Edina, and the Brian Quinones case. I mean, this is prevalent, it's ongoing, and I have finally, after Daunte Wright, I finally am comfortable enough saying that the Brooklyn Center Police has on their, or Brooklyn Center City has on their payroll serial killers, state sanctioned and allowed serial killers. And I am okay with saying that now because that is what is happening. And then we also find out that, you know, the city of Brooklyn Center apparently was founded by Earl Brown, which we all knew. But what we didn't know was Earl Brown was apparently a part of the KKK and was Brooklyn Center's first sheriff. So that place is definitely built on white supremacy, like quite literally. And so what we're doing right now is trying to take advantage of everything that's going on and hoping that that an attorney actually will take us on, Ben Crump, and fighting for justice and being able to prove. So the other thing to point out is that every highest up person in the organizations that touched my son's case, Hennepin County District Attorney Mike Freeman was taken off the George Floyd case, deemed due to sloppiness. Well, he had my son's case at the same time. He had Brian Quinones' case at the same time. He had Travis Jordan's case at the same time. You can't tell me he was sloppy on George Floyd's case and not sloppy on our cases, right? You can't be sloppy one day and not sloppy the next day. And then the other department that dealt with my son's case was the Brooklyn Center Police Department. The city manager got fired. And then the police officer, the commanding officer in my son's case, and the murderer in Daunte Wright's case has been charged with, well, manslaughter. We're trying to get murder. And then the chief of police. Well, I know he's put in his resignation. I haven't had time to check to see if it's been accepted or what, but so all of the highest up people involved in my son's case have all been deemed incapable. There is no possible way that a person in my position can trust that he had that the case had any sort of fair element whatsoever. And so I am out here fighting for justice for my son, but at the same time got to fight for justice for all other stolen lives, and also taking steps to make sure that this doesn't happen to anybody else. You, your children, I don't care who. White, black, yellow, red, yellow, mental issues, not, drug user, not, I don't care what your situation is. I don't want you to be murdered. And most specifically, and I think people are starting to forget this, but the police are not supposed to be our judge, jury, and executioner. And that's exactly what's happening time and time again. And if we can't figure out how to hold them accountable, it's going to continue to go on. So that's why I do what I do. That's why I continue to come on these things when I'd rather be taking a nap or hanging out with friends. But it's important because it needs to stop. And by doing that, it's the laws we got to pass and getting certain people out of office, and then better people who aren't just lip service people and more concerned about their next election instead of serving in the term that they were actually elected for.
I just had a couple questions.
Before you do that, Brock, I'm gonna have to get off. Tashira's on the mic. You can hear right now, dressing the crowd in front. I'm gonna go right now to connect. I don't think that Tashira's gonna be able to get on because there's a few other families and stuff. She is also speaking, and Paul's down here as well. Gonna speak about Travis Jordan. You can hear her. And but Bailey is on the line, so I'm gonna leave y'all and I'm gonna come back to you. So I'll be back after I connect with Tashira.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, just a couple things. So the prosecutor was Mike Freeman in this case that investigated what happened, and he basically, how long was he investigating it, and when did he decide not to? He closed the case, right?
Yes, it was
it was 61 days of BCA.
No, just the full amount of time.
I'm saying, and then Mike Freeman got the case, and it was like 2 months.
I want to say it was like 10.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
But we're pretty sure they probably had it done earlier because I talked to the Department of Corrections.